Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate Open Education Week. I am Everett Igobwa, University of Alberta, and I'm so pleased to introduce this session titled Open Education and UDL Meet Course Design. Our presenters are Verena Roberts from Thompson Rivers University and Josie Gray from BC Campus. Let's all say welcome in the chat or with a Zoom reaction or a wave in your camera as they get started. During the presentation, we will use Jamboard and the link is in the chat. Please click on the link and to add an answer to the 3 questions, use the left panel. From the top, go to the 4th option, the sticky note, which will enable you to write on the whiteboard. Now over to Josie and Verena.
Well, thank you, Everett. My name is Dr. Verena Roberts. I'm respectfully acknowledge that I am situated on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the First Nations and Métis people, otherwise known as Edmonton, Alberta. I am an instructional designer working as the lead on the Zero Textbook Cost Initiative and Pathway, specifically the Associate Science Diploma Pathway at Thompson Rivers University. But my background is in K-12 education as an online teacher for many years, as well as an adjunct assistant professor with the University of Calgary at Workland School of Education. And this picture acknowledges the North Saskatchewan River, and I grew up in Edmonton, and every time I come down to the river, it just brings a smile to my face and makes me think of all the great memories that the river brings all of us here in Edmonton. Welcome today. Josie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Josie Gray, and I live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and the territories of the Wasanich people. I've been an uninvited settler on these lands for 8 years, and I'm very grateful for the time that I've spent here. This is where I completed my undergraduate degree and also where I started my work in open education for BC Campus and where I completed my master's degree while studying from home during the pandemic. I work for BC Campus on the open education team as manager of production and publishing. So I am very involved in supporting instructors and faculty and staff in creating open educational resources. And in particular, I work a lot around accessibility and making sure those resources are designed to be accessible to students with disabilities. So our session objective today is pretty simple. Well, maybe not simple, but we only have one. But we are really looking to explore how open education and universal design for learning can be seamlessly weaved together in course design.
Yes, kind of a small but big task, Josie. So the first thing we wanted to start with is learning a bit about you and what open means to you. So Wiley's Law states you should never use open as an adjective unless you can clearly describe how the open things differ from the normal thing. And I want you to think about that as you link down to the Jamboard that you'll find in the chat. I want to learn a little bit about what open learning or open means to you. Now you will see that there's some ideas here already. There we go. But you can move those little stickies around, and the way you do it, if you don't know how to use a Jamboard, you add a sticky on the side. So you just click on the sticky like that. Then you add what your comment is, and it will come up. You can change the color of your sticky. Good. So we have free, low cost, inclusive, outside, like that one. You can remix it. You can access it. Authentic. There was some discussion in Twitter this morning about how open is authentic and what does that mean? Being recognized as a creator of knowledge, not just a consumer, accessible to all. I think for both Josie and I, that's probably one of the main reasons we do what we do, the accessibility, safe. This is great. Just put them all over. It's meant to be messy and fun and learner and teacher-centered. I love that one too. Participatory, accessibility, free, adaptable, credible. Haven't seen that one in a while. That's great to see. Credible. It is credible. It is safe, and it can be unsafe. And we'll talk a bit about that today. Context specific. Great. Okay, organic. So what is an open educator? Nascimbeni and Burgos talk about being an open educator as someone who chooses open approaches when possible and appropriate. And that's what we're going to get into a little bit about today. Your goal is to remove all unnecessary barriers to learning. They work through an open online identity. So they have some kind of reputation, and rely on online social networking to enrich and implement their work, understanding that collaboration bears a responsibility towards the work of others.
And then, so we've kind of talked about accessibility already, but really wanted to offer a definition because it is a term that we're going to be talking about a lot. So it's important to think about what we mean by it. So with accessibility is really about designing things, whether that be infrastructure, objects, services, experiences, any type of thing, so that they can be accessed and used by people with a range of disabilities, including people who use assistive technologies. So disability is a huge category, and as such, access needs can look really different to different people. And in education, accessibility needs to be considered throughout the educational experience. So that includes the design of physical and virtual spaces, technologies, educational materials, and course design. And if you're looking for more concrete information about how to create accessible educational materials, because that's not really something we're going to get into the details of today, a resource I would recommend is the Accessibility Toolkit, which you can access at opentextbc.ca/accessibility toolkit. And this resource focuses on open educational resources, but the information in it can really be generalized to all sorts of digital educational resources. So whether you're writing a blog post or creating in Microsoft Word, a lot of the principles will apply. And basically, it'll provide step-by-step instructions for making different types of educational resources accessible, including a specific focus on text, links, images, the use of color, video, audio, math, and links. So when talking about accessibility, it's really helpful to talk a little bit about how we think about disability. And so the medical model of disability understands disability as an individual problem, affliction, or a deficit that needs a cure or accommodation. It sees disability as something that's grounded in an individual. And this is the model that is used generally in medical settings. And it is also used in universities and colleges where students need to have a diagnosed disability to be eligible for accommodation. In contrast, the social model of disability sees disability emerging when there is a mismatch between a person and their environment. So with this view, disability becomes more of a spectrum that can affect different people in different ways, depending on their context and their environment and the tools that they have access to. And it's also a product of history and culture. So for example, someone who has no vision and uses a screen reader to access digital content will not be able to interpret an infographic without asking for help. The medical model of disability puts the onus on them to ask for an accommodation, while the social model of disability puts the onus on the person who created or shared that infographic to provide that information in an alternative format. So the social model of disability points out that many barriers that currently exist don't need to be barriers. So another example is only having steps to access a restaurant rather than there being a ramp that everyone could use. And so this idea is very valuable in course design because it asks people involved in course design to prioritize accessibility and flexibility from the very beginning in order to reduce or eliminate the need for accommodation. So all sorts of things affect the accessibility of a course, and these things are very much context dependent and they can vary from student to student. So for example, a student's day-to-day life can affect their access. So thinking about educational materials, a student who has to spend an hour on a crowded bus commuting to school and spend long days on campus studying, they might not really like heavy print textbooks that they have to pack around all day. And they might just decide to leave it at home rather than lug it to school. So that might be an example of a context-dependent barrier to access. Another example is differences in digital literacy among students. Many OER are primarily online, and we're teaching more and more online. And for those of us who maybe work at a computer all day, it's very easy to take for granted our comfort and experience with working in digital spaces. And even young college students who grew up with smartphones and easy access to internet might not know how to navigate their learning management system, for example. And also, like, access to technology. Not every student has their own computer, and if materials are only available online, they will likely struggle to access them. So all of these things are examples that can be very specific to an individual and their own context. And so one approach will not work for all students. And so in this session, we're going to be exploring how open education and universal design for learning can help build in choice and flexibility within courses. And just on the topic of internet access, wanted to share this graphic that compares teaching strategies based on the level of bandwidth required and the immediacy of the activity, meaning whether or not it's something that people can do in their own time. So this graphic uses an X and Y axis to divide up these different teaching strategies. And on the X-axis, there's low to high immediacy, and on the Y-axis, there is low to high bandwidth. So on the high bandwidth and high immediacy section, there is things like live video conferencing and audio conferencing like we're doing right now. With high bandwidth but low immediacy, there's pre-recorded video or audio, as well as asynchronous discussions with video and audio. And then with high immediacy but low bandwidth, there is collaborative documents or group chats and messaging. And then low immediacy and low bandwidth, there are discussion boards with text and images, email, and then readings with text and images. So from my perspective, this graphic just conveys the variety of approaches that can be taken in online environments. And just to point out that live video conferencing isn't the only option when teaching online.
Safe learning spaces is really an important element when we're thinking of UDL and open learning. So these are some of the ideas. Literally from the mouths of babes, I guess you can say. They came from my dissertation research, and I was looking at conditions for safe learning spaces in high school open contexts when I was looking at how to integrate open educational practices. Some of the things, I'm not going to read this out, but I want you to look at them because these are really important to specific learners. And that's what Josie and I want to highlight throughout this whole presentation, that what might be safe for one learner might be fine with another learner. But the one that came up the most was freedom to choose what you want to learn and how you want to learn it. And I know that we've talked about online learning as, access anytime, any place, but it's also thinking about discussion threads, how we speak to each other, rules and expectations clearly, like ground rules cited ahead of time, expectations on when we're having video conferences, when we're not having video conferences. So there's lots of different perspectives on what a safe learning space means for one student or from others. The last one is also really important to me, is teachers providing feedback and advice to be accessible, eager to help and provide access to safe resources that may be needed throughout the learning process. While you might design something ahead of time and ensure that you've created these safe learning spaces for your students, I think COVID, the world, I think we realize now that we always have to have that plan B and that plan C. And again, recognize that there's always a student who's going to come to you with that extra support and something that you've never previously considered. So be open for that, to be accessible for your students, but to also be accessible as an instructor and as a designer. Now, I think, before we went on, Josie, Alice just had a question for you. Should we or want to send paper packets of course content from LMS in a fully online course with communication via telephone or email? Do you see that one?
Yes, thank you. I think that's absolutely an option. And I think it's an approach that's been done before, like before my time, but I've heard other people, Tanis Morgan in particular, has talked about using email and packets of paper materials sending out to more remote communities. So I think there are a lot of creative solutions if you're working with students who do have some of those digital literacy or internet barriers that is like less common in city centers and that kind of thing.
Just be open to whatever we're looking at for the students. And actually that goes right into the next slide as well. So this is thinking about your learner profile ahead of time and apply this learner's empathy map to your course and learning. And what that means is you're thinking about your unconscious bias as a learning designer or instructional designer, but thinking about that and recognizing that, thinking about what do the students think and feel when they're part of your course? What do they see? What do they say and do? What do they hear? So put yourself in their shoes. Take the time to go in and really become that student from different personas and perspectives. And once you've done that, think about some pain points, which means what are some things that maybe you could work on? What are some areas that need adjustment? What is difficult to hear or see, think, or feel? Or do you see yourself in this course at all? Do you hear yourself in this course at all? Similarly, gain points. What did you do well? What is something that you do as an instructor or designer that you know that the students will feel safe or secure or heard or felt or at least you would hope that they would think and feel that they were included in your course. Okay, I'm just going to look. I've got some comments. Yes, definitely, Everett. This is a great way of integrating EDI and considering equity, diversity, and inclusion. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. Now, I have chosen to be vulnerable, and I'm going to give you an example of one of the things that I will do. This is from a high school course. I will always start every course with a video of myself to model vulnerability, but also to model why we want to build those learning relationships and get to know each other as human beings. Always taking into account. You do not expect this for every student, and they can build relationships not just through video. So we can just share just a little bit here. I think Josie has set it up.
Hi, I'm Verena Roberts, and I'm your lead facilitator for this course, HSO Lead 13. This is a course that's a dream for me because I've been trying to figure out how to create opportunities for high school students to learn in networked environments, open environments, and things that in higher education they call MOOCs, which are massive open online courses.
Yeah, we could turn off. So thanks, Josie. Perfect timing. So the point here is you guide and give a little bit of information about yourself, not personal information that can be taken against you or used against you, but really encouraging the students to feel included, wanted, know why you're coming into this and sharing your ideas and designing this course for them, because it is all about the students. So on that note, we're going to go back to the Jamboard. And we're going to think about how can you build relationships with your students in online learning contexts. So we've given you the video as an example, but we want you to share your ideas with us. So how can you or do you build relationships with your students in online learning contexts? Taking the time to do that. And again, informal hello videos, exactly. Just take the little sticky by adding it right here. You click on sticky note there. Use an avatar in your LMS. Absolutely. Personalize it. Model your experiences. Arrive early and chat. I often play music at the beginning of my synchronous online sessions and let the students choose their video or the music. Have regular office hour. Look at all these answers though. That is just spectacular. We have so many people giving examples of building relationships. Yes, I like the varied communication, that flexibility, realizing that sometimes we need that one-on-one building relationships. Sometimes it's a group. Don't be afraid to reveal personal interests. provide plenty of communication, host a study hall. Great.
So now we're going to move a little bit more into Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. So UDL is a framework for course design that aims to give students equal opportunities to learn. And it does that by taking a one-size-fits-one approach. So it assumes that students are different and that you can't treat all students the same and expect them to all succeed and learn. So instead, UDL aims to provide students with flexibility to be able to move through the course based on their needs, contexts, and interests. So UDL is broken up into 3 principles. The first principle is to provide multiple means of engagement, which basically relates to providing different opportunities and choices to motivate students to learn and persist through a course. The second principle is to provide multiple means of representation, which relates to providing students multiple options over how they consume and organize information. So for example, that can mean providing students a choice between reading an article or watching a video. And finally, provide multiple means of action and expression, which means to give students flexibility and choice in how they demonstrate their learning. So for example, maybe one student wants to write an essay and another one wants to do a presentation. And the reason there are small images of the human brain with different regions highlighted is because UDL is guided by research on the brain and how we learn. And so these different principles align with a different neural network. So one thing that UDL encourages is for instructors to separate the means from ends in learning goals in order to give students more flexibility and choice. So what this means is that learning goals should focus on what students need to be able to do without getting too specific in terms of how they should be demonstrating that learning. So the goal here is to ensure a student's ability to demonstrate their knowledge is not being restricted by a skill that they are weaker in that is not actually directly relevant to what is being taught. So can anyone think of an example of a learning goal that includes requirements that may not be relevant to students to what students are learning? Feel free to put any ideas in the chat because I don't think we have a Jamboard slide for this. Making videos, thank you, Ariana. Making videos is likely a requirement if you're doing a film studies class, but being able to make a video isn't super relevant in biology. So that's a great example. Audio files, presentation, yes. Being a good presenter does not represent my personal ability to write, for example. Thanks, everyone. Writing an essay for a biology course. Thanks, Verena. Absolutely. So one of the examples that I came up with is like a learning goal in a human anatomy class might be write a paragraph about how the circulatory system works. And so in this case, write a paragraph has been made part of the learning goal. However, the learning goal could just be describe how the circulatory system works. And that would give more flexibility in how students can show that they understand the circulatory system. And that way, students who are not strong writers can use other ways to demonstrate their learning. So what we are talking about here is the idea of construct relevance in assessment. So a construct in this context is the knowledge, skills, or abilities being measured by an assessment. And so how can you make sure an assessment is designed to only evaluate constructs that are relevant to the learning goals of the course?
Oh, wait 1 sec. You have a question, Josie.
Oh, thank you. I'm not very good at watching the chat.
No, that's why you have me. Do you find that students ask, though, do you want this as a paragraph? For example, do they want more specific guidelines at times?
Rena, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely. Yes. Students absolutely ask. And that often is that moment when you think they're just trying to meet my needs as opposed to meet the learning outcomes. So I think what Josie's getting at in all these examples is rethinking how does the student demonstrate evidence of learning that meets the learning outcome, as opposed to whatever activity I've created and can they do that activity? They're completely different contexts. I hope that answers the question. Keep going.
Thank you. So UDL has a number of potential benefits. So one of those is the potential to reduce the need for individual accommodation because you're providing choice and flexibility. And so it gives that choice and flexibility, makes that available for all students, regardless about whether they're registered with the institution's disability office. It also helps focus attention on specific course learning outcomes and really getting to the core of what students are aiming to learn in a specific course. So our next question, going back to the Jamboard, is what are some other benefits of UDL in online course contexts?
So please fill in some of your experiences or your perceived possibilities using UDL. Doesn't mean you've done this yourself, but how do you think UDL can support all learners in thinking about online course contexts in particular? Makes things flexible for people with different personal contexts, makes content more discoverable by search engines. That's a good one. Asynchronous learning advantages for ESL students. Yes. May support students who did not know they needed specific supports. I'm working on an open homework system project right now. And one of the research items that came up was that it distinguished by sex for open homework systems, which I was fascinated by in this research study, that males feel that they don't really need open homework systems because they don't need to practice what they're doing in a specific science course. However, males generally do need to develop their organizational skills, and open homework systems support that. Alternatively, females need to build confidence in science, and that's how open homework systems helps them build their confidence. So developing and expanding an open homework system helps different learners in different ways, regardless of their sex. It helps different people in different ways. And that's what we're getting at. Some of these benefits by thinking about online learning help one student, but help many in different ways. Because I don't know who's confident and not confident and organized and not organized. Building with UDL, less time investigating the specific diversities of our students. Yes, because then you're helping everyone from the beginning. Helps those who want, so you're helping a little bit for everyone while helping one visually, helps those with others with audio. Can create a clear sense of welcome and belonging, which reduces anxiety because needs are anticipated and met. Going back to the very beginning, creating safe learning spaces. Okay. Oh, maybe we should check the chat. There's too many things going on. So Christina says, do you want to reread that one, Josie?
Sure. Christina was just sharing about teaching in philosophy and how a lot of those philosophy outcomes are based on writing essays and really starting to rethink about like what are the actual learning goals in philosophy and what are other ways that those kind of learning goals could be demonstrated and met. So yeah, great example.
And then Heather did add in a recent press book that we actually have added at the end into our references as well. It just came into, Nick Baker actually tweeted it out, and that's when I saw it 2 days ago. So we have it in our references as well.
Awesome. So now we're going to kind of get into each of the different principles of UDL and talk through some examples. So the first principle has to do with multiple means of engagement. So again, this is looking at strategies for drawing students into the course and getting them motivated and engaged. So it's trying to, perk their interest, and like sustain their effort throughout the course and like able to, make it to the end. And I will pass it back to Verena.
So again, we're going back to my dissertation research that kind of expanded into higher education to really look at how does all this apply when we're thinking about learning design. How do we connect UDL and learning design? And so I've started to work on the open learning design framework. And there's 4 interconnected parts of the framework. The first one we've mentioned is building those learning relationships. The second one is once you've built those learning relationships, and this continues, one doesn't just end and you start to the next one, that's why the lovely little interconnected visual on the side. The next one is clarifying the co-design process and negotiating each learner's personal learning pathway. So you need to get to know your students in order to figure out how to support them. But at the same time, using UDL ensures that you are meeting those needs before you start. Building and sharing knowledge, because the learners can choose how to communicate their learning and how to make their thinking and learning visible. And that's giving them the opportunity to focus on the learning outcomes rather than focusing specifically on one way to do an activity. And the other one that we'll get into a little bit is sustaining the learning beyond a course, project, or activity and throughout the learning process by developing and expanding upon personal learning networks. And that can be by creating content in the open, so that builds that reputation and the students have a place to go to find things in the future, so that the learning just doesn't end in the course. And what we mean by that is often course is finished and all the content is closed if they haven't saved it or downloaded it or whatever, but the whole purpose of learning is building knowledge. So we want to think about how we can expand upon those boundaries and barriers and support the learning beyond one course. Okay.
So we have a great question in the chat. So if we're with learning outcomes, if we're trying not to specify how students should demonstrate their knowledge, what do rubrics look like?
Kathy, who I happen to know. If you're using rubrics to support course learning outcomes, the criteria would follow the course learning outcomes on the side, and then how they would demonstrate their evidence of learning isn't necessarily assessed, but it would be specific to the course learning outcomes as the criteria on the side. So your criteria, for example, would not be effort. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. Yeah, okay. There we go. The criteria instead would be the learning outcomes. And so getting towards the designing pathways for learning, some more support and thinking about advanced course design, like we're talking about, Kelly. I don't know if this one in particular talks about how thinking about course learning outcomes in particular, but we just want to highlight there are some resources already available. And of course, they're in the open. So we have a press book here to help you with advanced course design. Now, this is what I'm getting to with the personal learning environment, as well as expanding that learning beyond the learning management system. So we have in the middle the walled garden of the learning management system. So within that walled garden, you have your announcements, gradebook. Your gradebook should always be in your learning management system. The data collection and data collection, personal information, always contained behind a wall. But discussions, assignments, email, course content, all really regularly kept in that walled garden. What we're suggesting is perhaps expanding that outside without confusing the students too much. So I have successfully confused students regularly by trying to do all these little blogs or video podcasts, collaboration tools, social networks, wikis, community projects, doing it all at once and integrating that into learning management system. That doesn't work. What we're suggesting is maybe take one step. For example, I integrate a Twitter hashtag with every course that I do. And I talk about it at the beginning of my course so that my students know, should they be interested in Twitter, that they're going to see things in the discussion that are ideas from experts and people around the world. And it's always going to be there. That Twitter hashtag isn't going to go anywhere after the course, but it expands upon ideas. And some of the students go in and they look at those resources and ideas and they integrate it into what they're doing within the course, but it's not an expectation. But it gives you that I design for enrichment. I design for students who feel safe and want to integrate social learning networks into their current course experience. Some other examples are a blog, and we're going to use that as an example as well. So I will have a blog that goes along with my course in the learning management system, and the blog doesn't go anywhere at the end of the course. It stays there, and the students can continue to look at it for information or often contribute towards it as well, or build upon it.
So the next principle of UDL is around multiple means of representation. So looking at how the materials that you're sharing with students can support their learning. And so this one is super relevant when talking about open educational resources, because thinking about how open educational resources can be offered in multiple different ways to give students choice. So as a question back to the Jamboard, what are some examples of providing multiple means of representation with educational materials?
So what are some examples of of providing examples of multiple representation. Transcripts with your video or audio files, fantastic. I noticed even when my video came up earlier, you had the CC on the closed captioning, Josie. So that's great, just doing it, like modeling it as we go along. And you actually taught me how easy that is within Google Slides. Yeah. Now, it's not always perfect. So thinking of safe learning spaces and inappropriate words that can randomly come up. You just have to check those transcripts, but image descriptions. Pressbooks has the option for multiple file downloads. So you can read online or download for later.
I love it when people read my mind. That's literally my next slide. Thank you.
Yeah, I am noticing that we're like transitioning. Another
Awesome.
one, yeah, I know at UBC, I was working with an Indigenous scholar. He taught a kinesiology course, and he would always read the instructions at the beginning of the page. Like he put in a little read aloud, and it was to develop relationships, but also to let everyone hear his voice. So he knew what he was, and it would also support anyone who was having difficulties for whatever reason. But it was really beautiful. Each time you'd open, you had the choice whether you'd listen to it or not. And he had a beautiful, deep voice. Virtual machine where you can interact as an example of a concept. Yeah. Want to create OER in large print editions. That's interesting. Yes. I remember seeing some large print editions at an open conference before. Chemistry models, brain models that are physical. Yes. Yes, but it's also integrating authentic representations of learning and not just text. So for chemistry, how do we integrate the labs? How do we encourage experiential learning, lab-based learning?
Yeah, so the very first example that I wanted to share was with Pressbooks, which is an open textbook publishing platform that many different institutions use to create open educational resources. And one of the big strengths of Pressbooks is it creates a web book that can be accessed anywhere at any time, but it also exports into multiple formats that can be downloaded. And each of these formats have different strengths depending on how you might want to use and engage with learning material. So that was one. Also, lots of people are talking about multiple modalities. So using text, images, video, audio, all sorts of different modalities to give students some flexibility in how they engage with content. So that might be encouraging students to use text-to-speech tools that are available for free, or selecting readings that are also available as audiobooks, providing a video and a reading that kind of offer equivalent information, things like that. I have a few examples of those things, but I know we're getting short on time, so I'm not going to play through them, but if I will share our slides after, so you can go through and watch them for yourself if you like. So I've got an example of text-to-speech.
Linear measurement can be defined.
Oh, so that text-to-speech, and this is an example of here's an example of a glossary tool where students can click a word and they're shown the definition. So to help with language and learning new terminology. Here is an example of a video tutorial included in a hairstyling textbook. And another example of a screen reader reading math content aloud. Another few examples that I wanted to share relate to H5P. So H5P is a tool that allows you to create interactive activities that students can engage with on their own time. So H5P is available in Pressbooks, but also embedded in quite a few LMSs as well. And so if you're wanting to learn more about H5P, you can go to h5p.org and also kitchen.opened.ca, where there's lots of H5P related resources. But just to show you a few examples of what H5P can look like and how it's been used in different contexts, here's an activity taken from a Writing for Success open textbook, where it's asking students to identify sentence fragments with a bunch of different options. So a student would go through, select which ones they think are sentence fragments, and then click check, and they'll be immediately informed which ones they got correct and which ones they got wrong. So they can kind of reflect on their answers and apply their learning. Here's another example of an interactive video. So this one's in a nursing textbook where students are watching a demonstration of hand washing. And throughout the video, as the video goes, it'll pause and ask them a question about something that was just covered in the video, so they can kind of reflect on their learning as they go through the video. And then this last example that I will share is in a business writing textbook. So here it's showing a sample document that's illustrating how to write clearly. And then different parts of the document are labeled, like the title and headings, the topic and transition sentences and bulleted list. So when someone clicks on the different hotspots in the image, more information about each of those items pops up, and how they should be used and that kind of thing. So the final principle is around multiple means of action and expression. And this focuses on how to support students in participating in the course and managing and communicating their learning in a way that works best for them. So in terms of guidelines, it's looking at physical action, expression and communication, and executive function. And I will hand it back to Verena to talk through another example.
This is the last example. I'm going to do it in 2 minutes. So this is going to be very quick. What this is I created an e-portfolio that worked along with my English students. So each week I would put in a provocation. So we'll go to the next page and we'll see. And the provocation, and I use the word provocation rather than video, whatever medium I wanted to use. So each week it might be a video, it might be a song, it might be a poem, it might be a text, it might be a visual. Every week it was different. I get the students to brainstorm through that provocation. So they started to learn and practice playing with different mediums and not really thinking of it as a medium, but thinking of it as a provocation. Then they would answer those provocations in their own e-portfolio that they developed themselves. So I would guide them and develop their, the goal was to develop their digital literacy skills. This is for an English course though. And then they would put the answers onto their e-portfolio, which they could open to the public or not. And finally, you'll see the way that they responded. The next slide. I would encourage them to think about responding or communicating or demonstrating their evidence of learning in a different way. So I have links to blogging, writing, podcasting, journaling, sketchnoting, creating video, writing a song, and slam poetry. What emerged as a result of this is that the students started asking, well, can I do it this way? Or so I had students creating a sculpture and then describing the sculpture. But they would take the sculpture and then they would still write some kind of text, or they'd do some kind of oral means of communication as well. Someone did a dance, an interpretive dance, and then they started to really get into thinking about how to do this, because I often feel that my students say to me, like we said right at the beginning, well, don't you just want a paragraph? A paragraph's just easier to do. But it's not just that a paragraph is easier to do because we've always been asked to do it. Is that you're not going to know that you like to do this or that you learn this way or you communicate this way until you're given the opportunity to do it. So they're encouraged to do this every week.
Yeah, so this slide here is kind of just showing that UDL is an iterative practice, and it's not something that's really completed or something that can be perfected. So these slides kind of shows a cyclical diagram that represents a process of getting started with UDL. So really reflecting with what are your students struggling with, identifying what UDL principles or checkpoints might help address what they're struggling with, investigating how you could incorporate UDL here, and then putting that strategy into practice, assessing how that strategy worked, and then reflecting on if the new method or strategy had the desired effect. And that's kind of a cycle that would continue as much as is necessary.
So at this point, we were going to a group activity if we didn't have any questions, but one of the questions is, give us an example of something that, we could discuss. So think about a course that you're currently teaching, come up with a question, maybe choose an activity or some of the content that could be redesigned, adapted, or modified. Consider these principles of UDL and examples of open learning shared today, and maybe share with us or describe the activity or content that you're thinking about redesigning, or if you have a question. And then together we can help give suggestions about next steps or redesign the design process for you.